All right. So now, the way our Chalk Talk formats run is this is I don't want to say it's informal because it's a class setting, so it's formal in that sense. But typically when I do Chalk Talks, it's whiteboard sessions, going to the portal, looking at different configurations, maybe looking at some code examples to show you how it runs and so forth. That's the goal of this session here. We're going to try to avoid killing you with PowerPoints, or at least I am. JF may go with the PowerPoints, but I try to avoid PowerPoints for this type of course because you have all the reading material. You can read that on your own. But so we're going to get started here. And what I have here on the page, this, if you, earlier today in our first session, I pasted this link. This is the link for the course syllabus. And it covers all the modules, all, what, 5 or 6 modules that we have within our course here. It covers everything. This week, we're focusing on this one right here primarily. And then we're going to, let me see here. Yeah. Then we're going to do natural language, which is, so we're going to do the first 2 this week here. Next week, we're going to do natural language. We'll do some generative AI, document intelligence, and so forth. So all the information is there. So we're going to focus our Chalk Talk for now on getting started with Azure AI services. And what we're going to do is we're going to whiteboard and we're going to go through some of this information. Again, we're not going to read it. We're just going to kind of talk about some of the things related to this that you need to know. So, and again, feel free to ask questions. Remember, there's no such thing as a dumb question if you don't know the answer. So keep that in mind. If you don't know, you don't know. Ask that question. JF, you say you don't use PowerPoints either. Okay, so I think we're on the same page then, guys. So no death by power. This is going to be a PowerPoint-free month. How's that? we'll call this a PowerPoint-free fasting month. So we're going to all avoid any PowerPoints as much as possible. So there's the URL for the main link there. I think he was talking about the course URL there. And then on the main URL, we're going to cover this first section here, preparing to develop AI solutions, creating and consuming AI solutions. We'll talk about that. And I don't want to steal too much thunder, so I'll leave some of this stuff for JF to do also here later on this week. Right? Or I think I'm doing both Chalk Talks this week. We'll see. I think I'm doing them both. All right, so let's get started here. Let's talk a little bit about AI. Now, in order to start, and we're going to be bouncing between whiteboard and the portal. So we're going to be doing some things here. Again, the session is being recorded. So if there are things that you end up missing or you want to revisit later on, then you do have the ability to play the videos back over. You know, I like to do that sometimes when I'm doing classes. I'll play the video back because maybe I missed something, or sometimes I'm just slow. I'm getting old, so sometimes I have to hear things a couple times or see it a couple times for it to process in my brain here. All right. So the first thing is we're going to go to the Azure AI services page. So if you in the Azure portal, if you just type in AI at the top or any AI option, it's going to take you to this main page here. This is where you're going to provision the initial configurations for your AI services. So in order to understand this, let's go ahead and break out a whiteboard here. Let's talk about how it all works together. So what we have here is we've got our Azure, we'll call this our Azure environment, our subscription. Now keep in mind, you can have more than one subscription and so forth, but this is gonna be our Azure environment. Let's get rid of the word subscription. It's gonna be confusing. Now, within your Azure environment, there are certain services you get when you create it. One of those is Entra. And Entra is basically your identity and access management. It's your IDP, your identity provider. It's like the Active Directory for the cloud, basically. So you have Entra. That handles all your user accounts, your groups, and things like that. Now, within Azure also, you have resources. And there are a bunch of different types of resources that you can build within your Azure environment. And over here on the left, you'll see, most of you guys have dealt with this or at least played around with it in other courses. This is just my favorites, which is the defaults. I didn't really add anything in here, but there are hundreds of different services that you can search for in here and deploy. But one of those services that you can deploy is what we're looking at here, which is, for some reason, kind of screwed here, is AI. Now, here we go, AI. So specifically our AI services. So that's what we're going to deal with now. These are considered resources. Now, what we're going to do in our demonstration is we're going to look at, okay, well, how do we deploy a resource? What are some of the things you want to consider when you deploy an AI resource? And then we'll look at it programmatically from a code perspective on how do we connect an application, or how do we allow an application that we develop to consume that AI resource, to use that AI resource. So that's what we're going to focus on here in our first demonstration and discussion. And again, feel free to ask questions. I will tell you right now, if you ask a question that I don't know, I'll say I don't know. I'll ask JF if he knows the answer. If we don't know the answer, we'll tell you we don't know, but we'll get an answer for you. Okay? No one can know everything. We should be able to answer 99% of your questions, but every now and then we'll get a question like, I never thought of that before. So if we get that, we'll tell you, but we'll find an answer for you. Okay? All right. So now over here, and I told you guys, I apologized earlier today. Excuse me for my terrible drawings. None of you guys paid for the upgraded version of the class where you get Picasso-like drawings. You're going to get stick figures and boxes and terrible circles. I'm just letting you know now. So in here, we've got our Microsoft AI services. Let's call it infrastructure. And my typing sucks too. TRUCT. Infrastructure doesn't look right. INFRA, infra, STRUCTU. I guess that is right. It just looks weird. Okay. It looks weird, but I'm missing something there. I think I got an extra T in here. I forget it. Anyway, you know what I mean. Infrastructure. All right. So this is developed by Microsoft and our partners. And this is the brains of AI. Now, as a customer, what you're going to do is you do not have direct access to the brains of AI, if you will, the AI infrastructure. As a customer, what you're going to do is you're going to create your own instance. You're going to create your own instance of AI. So when you're in the Azure portal and you do a quick search for Azure AI services, and you go in here and you select some of these. Later on, we're going to talk about things like generative AI, which is our open AI here. Whether you're doing search or one of our vision services or facial recognition type services, or you want to do some type of translation or conversion, or document intelligence. These are all, we used to call these cognitive services, but they're now all part of the Azure AI services, as well as some other things. So when you deploy this, what you're actually deploying is an instance of that service. And what happens is that instance of the service then ties back to the Azure, Microsoft AI infrastructure. So when I say you do not have direct access to it, you don't. Programmatically, you're going to write your applications to connect to here, and then from here, it'll be sent to the Microsoft service to be processed from that point, and then we'll generate a response for you. So that's kind of the workflow for what we have. Now, in order to do this, you've got to create an instance. So let's go ahead in here, and let's go ahead and create our first instance. Now, at the very beginning, there's a decision you have to make. And the decision is do I do a single instance or a single service, or do I do what's called a multi-service account? If you go in here and select one of these, we'll call that a single service. If you do this one, it's a multi-service. Now let's talk a little bit about, excuse me, the differences between the two. How are they different? And it goes back down to billing. So remember, let's go back to our whiteboard here. We can create a single service or a multi-service type. The primary difference between them is if you use a single service, It's literally going to be one instance of one of our AI technologies. So if I were to go in and let's say we'll pick on we'll do OpenAI a little bit later. We're doing vision. So what we're doing, I would do computer vision. So I can go in here, I can create, if I go in here and select computer vision and create, I'm creating a single instance of that service. And if I fill in all the blanks and everything, it creates one instance of computer vision. If I go down here where it says AI services multi-service and I create it, now I can use this for multiple AI instances or multiple services. So why is that important? So let's go back to our awesome picture here and let's take a look at that. If I go with a single instance, so we're going to call this one our single one here. If I create a single instance, let's say that single instance is for vision. One of our vision services like facial recognition and so forth. So what's going to happen is it's going to generate an endpoint. And that endpoint is going to be in the form of a URL, which you use to access. Which is what you use to access the AI instance. So you're going to get an endpoint URL that's going to be included here, but you're also going to get a key. So think of the key, and I always spell my thes backwards. If there's ever like a serial killer and they spell their thes TEH, you know it's me because I can't help it. I do that every time. So don't tell anybody though. But so you get a key, okay? And you, from a developer standpoint, programmatically, you need both of those in your application. So what's going to happen is we're going to have an application sitting over here, our web app, excuse me, and our web app, programmatically, we're going to put that endpoint, we'll call it EP, endpoint URL, and key in our code. And that allows our application to send its request here. And then from here, let me change my drawing here. We can send it here. And then from here, it's sent to the brains of the Microsoft's AI infrastructure where it's processed, a response comes back, and then you get that response within your application. So that's kind of the workflow. But there's an additional component that we have here. We're going to throw a subscription in here. Anyone here not know what a subscription is? And I ask that because I don't want to, again, I don't want to assume anything. So if you don't know, let me know. Type no in chat if you are not familiar with subscriptions. And again, this is only because I want to make sure that, remember, we're all going to be on the bus together, okay? So if you don't know something, definitely let us know. All right. So you also got to have a subscription. So here's what happens. You make an API call, you make a request to your AI instance, it goes down here. Microsoft's internal process does its thing, it generates a response, sends it here, and then we send the billing information for what we just did to your subscription. So that's kind of the workflow that occurs as part of this process here. Everybody good so far? Any questions at this point? Yes, go ahead.
So, Bobby, just a not related basic question. I used Azure DevOps to. Is it something totally different, or is it something linked to this Azure ADO?
DevOps and this are two different things. They can work together, but they're two separate things.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Great question. All right, so that's the workflow. So now in this example here, notice I created a single instance of an AI service, which was Vision. Which means if I were to, here I'm going to go with my terrible drawings, guys. So if I'm sitting up here as an administrator, or let's say I'm a bean counter, I'm the one that calculates costs and things like that, I can easily run a report directly here, and that'll tell me exactly how much this instance cost. So if we were looking at this from a billing standpoint, maybe what I would do is I would have, multiple web applications, and each of those web applications could connect to its own instance. So this app would connect here. I would have another instance where this app would connect here. This app will connect to another instance. So now I can run a report either here, here, or here and get very granular utilization and cost information on a per app basis. So that's the benefit. So the benefit of a single instance, number one, is granular reporting and permissions. Because now if I have separate instances, I can set the permissions for this instance so that only this app and the team that manages that app behind the scenes can see it or manage it. If I had another instance here for this app, I can set the permissions for this for the app and then give permissions to the team that manages that application. So it gives you very granular role-based access control, RBAC. And you can see that when we go in here to our page. So for an instance, and I'm just going to pick a random instance here. If I can, I know I've got one somewhere around here. How do I not have one in here? That's weird. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm in my Microsoft one. I'm in my corporate one. That's why. Like, how do I not have any? Because I know I do. All right, here we go. All right, so now I know I've got some. There we go. So here's the example. So each one of these is a single instance of a service. So I can go into, let's say, the Bobby Prep instance that I have for OpenAI, and I've got an access control IAM. So because I have an individual instance, I can set permissions here for anyone that needs to access this, whether it be application level permissions or admin level permissions. So I can do very granular permissions at that level. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody good on that? Any questions? So now let's look at a multi-service deployment. Now, when you do a multi-service, we still have an endpoint URL, and we also have a key. So even with the multi-service, it's gonna generate a key for us. But here's the thing. Now inside of here, terrible. I can have multiple different AI services running in one instance. So the benefit here is it gives you one endpoint that you can use for all your applications. So if you want to do that, you can do that. The downside to doing this, though, is now you start losing that granular permission capabilities because it's very difficult to set permissions. You can do it, but it's a little bit more complicated to set permissions. And even reporting when it comes to like cost and utilization, it gets very difficult to do granular cost accounting for it. So if you don't care about permissions, one team manages everything. So if we put it all in one spot, then everybody's happy. Then you can use multi-service. Don't need granular utilization information, then you can use multi-service. But if you need to be able to pull things out and look at things a little bit more granularly, then you want to create a single instance of all the different services that we have out there. All right, any questions on that? So to deploy, and I'll demonstrate this for everyone, to deploy an instance, you just select create. So let's say we do computer vision. A single instance, I would select create. And let's go through some of the options here so you have a good idea of, and the options for most of the services are going to be pretty much the same. There's some minor differences here or there, but generally speaking, the bulk of what you see are going to be common across all of our services. The subscription is important for billing. This is how you pay. In a single instance, everything goes here. In a multi-instance, everything tied to that multi-service goes to that one. The resource group, you pick the resource group for permissions and management. And then the region. Now, in most Azure services, not just AI, but generally speaking in Azure, most Azure services, the region you select has no impact on feature sets. Meaning, if I were to deploy an Azure VM, just a general Azure VM, a typical VM, I can deploy it in any region and it works. The main difference between regions will be cost and performance, because If I've got a VM sitting in the US, but my application that's talking to that VM is sitting in China, it's got to go across the world to get there. So there's a latency issue. But outside of that, a VM's a VM. When it comes to our AI services, the region is important in what you select because certain features are not supported in every region. And this is where, and I'm going to put a few links in here for everyone. Let me move this over here. Let me find here. So we've got a bunch of links. So here you go. Here's a perfect example. I'll put this link as an example for everyone. So when we look at region and features, so availability zone capabilities, AI service integration. So if you notice here, Canada East doesn't support that, and there's a lot more. This is just a basic example. When we start looking at our tiers, there are different tiers that we have. In this case, we're looking at AI search documentation, but this is pretty much going to be similar across. You can get an idea of what tiers are available. So for different services, there are different tiers. Ravindra, yes, you have a question?
Yeah, Bobby. So is this location only for hosting or from where we can access this?
No, you can access it anywhere globally based on configuration. Out of the box, you can access it from anywhere on the planet. But when you're deploying, and this is for those that may be newer to region, the concept of regions, best practice is always to deploy the service as close to the consumer as possible. If your AI instance is going to be used by someone in China, deploy it in the Chinese region. If somebody's going to use it in Africa, like South Africa, deploy it in the South African region. So always, that's the best practice. But when it comes to AI services, that's not always the case. You still want to do that whenever possible, but in some cases, it may not be possible because certain things aren't supported. Okay? So, great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering, the restriction should apply based on from where the service is getting accessed, right? Is it not the case?
When you say restriction, what do you mean?
Like certain services might not be accessible in certain countries, right?
That data sovereignty component, yes, that does tie in also, but that's done behind the scenes. So if something is not authorized to be connected, you won't even get the option to connect it.
Got it.
Yeah, we're normally pretty good at if it's going to break a law, then you won't even see the option to do it, or it'll be grayed out or something like that.
Got it. Thank you.
Robin, you have a question. So Robin in chat says, if multiple client applications are using the same endpoint and key for AI services, would you recommend using a single or multi-instance? Great question. So it depends. And by the way, I hate saying that, but you guys are all IT people. You understand that it's never an easy answer, or most of the time it's not. If you use the same endpoint, there also are performance considerations that you need to keep in mind. Later on, I think JF is going to talk about OpenAI. We're going to be talking about OpenAI. And in OpenAI is a perfect example. There are limits on how many calls you can make. We don't call them calls. It's limits on how many tokens can be processed per minute, per hour. So there may be cases where you have to create multiple instances because each instance has a limit. So it depends. I would normally, here's how I would say it in most cases, and I hate to be general, but I'm going to be very generalized here. If everything ties to a single service, keep it under one instance because it makes billing and reporting easier. Unless you start hitting a threshold where it's exceeding the performance capacity of that instance, then you split it out. But if it's all tied together and the same people are going to manage it, and it's going to be in the same geographical location or the same region, then just do a single instance. Or I'm sorry, a multi-instance. So, and these are things that you need to consider. What I would tell you also, and this is, I'm going to say this now since this is our first week, JF and I are trainers for Microsoft. We can teach you the technology all day long. We can explain it to you. We can talk about different options. The problem is we don't know your corporate environments. We not even just from a technical standpoint, but there's politics involved in organizations and so forth. So it's hard to say what the best solution would be for your organization. Here's what I would highly recommend. Each of your companies are part of the ESI program, which means you have dedicated Microsoft account teams that work on your account. Find your account team, talk to your cloud solution architects, your CSAs, and your experts from Microsoft that are dedicated to your team, and they know your environment, they know the people, they know the culture, the politics, and they can tell you what best to use in your organization. So I don't want to say that as a cop out, but at the end of the day, that's going to be your best bet. So we can talk about the technology and give you options, but either yourself or you're going to have to bring someone in from Microsoft to help you figure out what's best for your organization. All right. Any other questions? Great questions so far. Any other questions? All right. So there are, as I mentioned before, and each of our AI services has its own documentation page. I'm just looking at AI search here. But if you notice here, there are technical limits that we have. So depending on the tier that you select will determine what you can do. So notice here, we're looking at AI search, which is essentially this right here. So we're looking at this service right here. That's what we're looking at right now. So with that service, with that AI service, there are technical limits that you have. There's hard and soft limits. So maximum services, so maximum instances you can have per region. With the free version, so if I go in here and I say, let's do the search since we're looking at search. So when I go in here and select create, and I go in here and I specify a resource group, a name, the location that I want it in, and then here are the different plans. Now again, different AI services, it'll look a little bit different for the plans, but it's the same thing. Some of them, like this one, has a bunch of plans, other ones don't. So it tells you exactly what you have for your limits. So if you do the free one, you can only deploy one. If you try to deploy another one, you'll get an error. And as you move up the list here, it looks like S2 gives you the most instances that you can have. And then search units. So search units is basically a performance, a CPU RAM type algorithm that we used. So notice here you get more search units as you go up here. So from 3 to all the way to 36 for these here, which is basically performance. So it'll vary based off of that. This is all tied back to your billing units and so forth. So always refer back to the documentation for whichever AI service you're using to see what those limits are. Because this is searching, there's indexing and limits and so forth. So it does matter what region you select, as well as what tier that you select when you're deploying your instance. So let's go ahead and continue on here. So for computer vision, notice here the pricing tier is just 2, free or standard that you select. And you can look it up and get if you click here, it'll take you to the page. For all of them, you're going to get basically acknowledging that you're going to use basically this. Forgive me, I like to joke around. This basically says you're not going to create Skynet, okay? You're not going to use this to build Terminators and destroy the world. You're not going to use it for anything bad, So responsible AI notice, and you're going to see this for all of our services that you're agreeing you're going to use it. You're not going to use it to steal data or, use it in any malicious or non-intended way. All right, so you got to check the box to agree to that. The next page. This is where we start getting into some level of importance. Remember, your AI instance that we're creating, so we're creating this right here. We're going to create an instance. That instance is going to have an endpoint and a URL, or I'm sorry, endpoint and a key. The networking options, let's see, Shivani, you say, do we have to create individual service environments when you want to create multi-service? No, you can create one vision, one document intelligence, and use it for everything if you want to. You don't have to create an individual. You can create multiple multi-service environments if you want to. So there's all kinds of things that you can do. But for every instance you deploy, or for every single instance you deploy, you're going to get a unique endpoint and a URL. The networking page asks us, where can these endpoints and URLs, these keys be accessible from? Meaning, does the resource that's making that call, that request into the AI service, must it be within the Azure environment? Meaning it can't be in the internet? Or can it be internet, meaning anything on the internet can potentially, just because someone has the endpoint doesn't mean they can use a service. Now, if they have the endpoint and key, they can use the service. So you want to protect your endpoint and your keys. You don't want to just put them out there for everybody to see, because if I know your endpoint and your key, so here's the damage that could be done. Let's say Vision, one of our Vision services. If I know your endpoint and key, and I'm going to pick on somebody, I'll pick on Tom here for a second. So, Tom, if you don't mind sharing, do you mind sharing what company do you work for, Tom? Just curious, if you don't mind sharing with us. If not, that's fine. Who do you work? Who do you work for? You know, Dr. Evil. Is Tom out there? Tom may have stepped away. Oscar, are you there? Oscar, who do you work for? Hopefully, Tom or Oscar, you don't work for the same company as Tom. Oscar, are you out there? Okay.
I work for Fujitsu.
Okay. Thank you for all right. Thank you for stepping up there. They must work for the same company. They're asleep. But all right. So Fujitsu. So let's say, Ravindra, I got access to one of your endpoints and keys at Fujitsu. Here's what I could do. I could generate my own application and make API calls to your AI instance using that endpoint and key, and I can use it for my app, but you're going to pay for it because it's making a request against your service. And remember, every time a request is made in here at some point, it's going to report back to subscription for billing purposes. So you only want your applications and your services accessing it. You don't want Bobby and everybody else on the internet to have access to it. So protect those endpoints and the keys. The endpoint is not as important, but that key is. That is very important. All right, so any questions on that? So that's what this asks us. Oh, was there a question? Sorry.
Yes. So if you go back to your if you bring up your whiteboard again, so that instance that you created, is it not
Right.
also controlled by like the Entra? So like I know that there are some services in Microsoft where like if say like some hour back like something like an hour back where you don't necessarily need a key, but like with your RBAC, you can control how many people can access that resource. You don't do that for the AI instance.
No, so that's a great question. And in order to understand that, you have to understand the permission structures in Azure as a whole. There are two separate permission structures in Azure. There's a permission structure specifically for all your Entra stuff. So your Entra, your domain, let's call these domain accounts, okay? So everything related to your Azure domain. And you can see that here. So if I go into Entra here, and I go into my roles, all of these roles, almost every role, there's a few that cross over, but for the most part, all of these roles give you some level of permissions to do stuff within Entra, within here and only here. There are a few that are exceptions, but for the most part, they only specific to Entra. Now, when I go into, let's say, an Azure resource, like an AI service or a virtual machine, here you'll see access control IAM right there. This and the specific roles that you see listed here, these are what we call resource roles or resource permissions. So for the most part, I cannot take an Entra role and give it permission to something like a virtual machine. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, just like I cannot take a role that's sitting in here and give it permissions to something in Entra. They're two separate permission structures. Does that make sense? I think that was John.
Yeah,
You asked?
that makes sense. But I was
Okay.
just thinking thinking in terms of like an application ID.
Okay. So now you're getting into something a little bit different here. So let's go back to our AI instance here. So once you let me finish this piece and then I'll get back to your question. Okay.
Okay.
Because that's a great question. So I'll get right back to you on that one. That's part of it done. Let me finish this first here. So when you define where you want the endpoint to be accessible from, very rarely do you want it accessible from the world. By the way, just because the endpoint is accessible from the world doesn't mean the world can get to it. because they still need permissions. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And the key is that permission. The key allows that any application globally, if it has that endpoint and that key, it can gain access. So normally we tell you not to use this, but to use either the second one, which is good, it's better, I should say, better, because now I can define only internal Azure networks as well as certain internet IP addresses. So I can be more granular in who has access. The bottom one is the best. This is what we call private links, private endpoints here, which basically it's a point-to-point connection between one resource, like one application, and one AI instance. It's a very granular connection. So that's going to be your best one. Now for our course, for the most part, I'm going to be using the internet one because security is JF's thing. I'm not going to talk about security right now. We'll let JF talk about security. All right. Now, let's say this AI instance needs to talk to other Azure services. Okay? Because remember, let's go back to our whiteboard here. The endpoint and key are for your applications to talk to the instance. But let's say hypothetically that your instance needed to talk to, I don't know, I'm going to pick something random, a SQL database, an Azure database. So that instance, for some reason, if it needs to talk to that database, it's got to authenticate against that database. So the option you see here is to create basically we call them managed identities, but they're like service accounts. They're Azure service accounts is what they are. So you can enable those. And then we always recommend that you tag everything you build. Tag it all. It costs you nothing to tag it, but tagging makes it easier for management, reporting, and so forth. So tag your stuff and then build it. So that's the process for building it. Now, once it's built, so I've got one here called Bobby Computer Vision Demo. And this is going to tie back to what you're asking, John. Right here, notice for this instance of computer vision, that's one of my instances of computer vision, I have access control IAM. These permissions here, whoever has permissions in here has the ability to make changes here and here. They can make configuration changes to our AI instance. For the most part, these are not application level permissions. So to take this back to our whiteboard here, the instance access control IAM allows you as administrators to manage this environment. That's what this is for. The access control IAM is not designed for your web application to authenticate to the instance. That's where as long as they have the key and endpoint, that's what they really need.
I think that we need that app registration, right?
App registration?
Yes.
Yes. For simplicity, yes. Your app must be, well, technically speaking, no. Your web app does not need to be registered with Entra to use AI. The only time your app would need to register with Entra would be if I have a user. So let's say I've got users. So I've got my users, and those users want to access the application, and I want the users to be able to use their Entra accounts to authenticate with, or some other identity provider. In that case, yes, you would need to register the app. But for the sake of this class, app registrations is not required. But in the real world, normally you would. Any other question? Everybody good with the pace so far? I just want to make sure everybody's good with the pace. And like I said, if I lose you at any point in time, we're all on the bus together. I'm the bus driver today, but you guys are all passengers. If I lose you, let me know so I can stop the bus and you can get back on again, okay? All right, because as we continue on this month, it's just going to keep building. Yes. Shawin,
Bobby,
did you have?
sorry. Yeah, I just had a quick question. Didn't mean to cut you. So my question was regarding this multi-server resource that you talked about. So as you know, as we know that within a multi-server resource, there can be a group of AI services which are exposed through a single endpoint, right? So from the web app, if I want to access any particular service within my multi-server resource, how does the web app pass that information to the Azure regarding which service I need the information from, because I only have one endpoint. So I'm guessing like there's some additional configuration from the app side that needs to be passed over to Azure so that it knows which specific AI service can provision my request.
Correct. So what will happen is in your applications, you're going to generate a client. You're going to build a client. And and depending on what service you're using, the client, how you build your client will vary. So let me give you an example here. So I've got one here. Let me see, where's my client settings here? Here we go, right here. So right here, we're authenticating the client that we're going to be using. So in here, it's asking for that service endpoint and the key, which I have here already pre-configured. So here's the endpoint and the key that I'm using in our demonstration that we're going to be doing today. So I have those things as part of that there. Now, further down here, where are we at here? Whoops, where did I go? I missed it here. So depending on which AI service you're using, like this one here, it's going to take an image, it's going to analyze the image, and it's going to generate captions. It's going to detect objects, generate some tags, and identify people within the image. So in your code, you're going to define, depending on which service you're using, how the client is generated to pass that request. And you'll see as we go through the different services over the next month, you'll see how to build those clients, set up authentication, and everything else. Great question.
Got it. Thank you.
So you'll see it. You'll see it as we go through here. All right. So now let's take a little deeper dive. And now I've got the instance built. So we'll pick on my computer vision one here. This is a single instance. So I'm going to go in here. Matter of fact, if I go to my multi-service, you'll see that I've got a multi-service one here also. So let's go to our single instance now. So Bobby Computer Vision demo. Now, this activity log keeps track of everything that you guys as administrators do to the resource. So if you make any changes here, delete, modify, whatever, it's going to show up in your activity log. This is purely for admin use. This is where you set permissions on the permissions here, or who can manage this environment. The permissions here are not for user access or application access, okay? Now remember, when you create an instance, it creates a key and an endpoint. Here's the endpoint, and then you have your key. So you can see the keys that are used as part of your service here. Now, we always give you 2 keys. In everything that we do, we give you 2 keys. The reason we give you 2 keys is so it's like changing your password. Periodically, you want to alternate keys that you're using in your application code for security purposes. So we give you 2. You use one, and then when that one's done, use key number 2. And then while you're using key number 2, you can regenerate or reset key number 1, and it changes the path, essentially changes the key. But your endpoint won't change. For most of your AI services, the region identifier doesn't matter in your code. This month we'll go through a few of them, but there are a couple of them that you must include the region as part programmatically when you're building your client. But for the most part, the region doesn't matter from a code perspective. Encryption. So you're going to have 2 options for encryption, and I'm going to make this very easy for you guys. Let me ask this question. Type yes in the chat window if you are underworked and overpaid. Is anyone here not have enough work to do it in your office, in your real jobs? Type no if you're underworked and overpaid. Anybody here need more work in their daily jobs? No. I've been in IT 30-something years, and I've never come across an IT person that's underworked. We're always juggling 15. Even today, I was talking to JF. When we're done with the morning session, I'm doing 15 other things that I have to do just to get, other tasks plus preparing for this afternoon. So with that being said, for the encryption, guys, I'm going to make your life simple. Unless you have a company policy or some type of regulatory compliance that requires you to use your own encryption keys, sometimes in healthcare and in financial and insurance company, in those sectors, they do require it for certain things. But for most things, let Microsoft generate the key for you. If you select this option, Microsoft creates the keys, Microsoft stores the key, Microsoft backs up the key. Microsoft changes the key automatically for you. You have to do nothing. All you have to do is sleep better at night, knowing that your data is your requests are encrypted. Okay, this is at rest encryption here. The second one here is if you have to bring your own key, select the second option. But with that, you have to generate the key, upload the key. You've got to alternate your keys. If you lose your key and don't have it backed up, you're screwed because we don't back up your keys that you use. So, and you can use key vaults and some other things to help you with that. But unless you have to, don't use your own keys. Okay. Now, depending on the AI service, you're going to see some like the pricing commitment tier and so forth. You'll see that the pricing model that we're using. Again, this is that network setting where you can go back later on. Do I want it accessible from everywhere, only certain locations, or highly limited? So I can pick that if I need to. Cost analysis. So for cost analysis here, this is a breakdown for this specific instance. So this is where having a multi-service versus a single service really come into play. With a single service, I can see exactly how much here to cost. If I have a multi-service instance, I've got to do some extra things to really try to break it down. Okay, so that's the big difference between them. All right. So your question is what exactly is encrypted? So as your request is sent into the AI model, it's stored temporarily as it's being processed. So anything that is stored locally will be encrypted at rest. That's what it is. But for the most part, we do not store your data long term. It's only long enough to process your request. So there's no long-term storage. Let's put it that way for this. All right, so now I've got my instance built. All this, everything that I just showed you, all that does, it builds an instance which generates my key and my endpoint that I could use for my application. Yeah, your response, by the way, your data is encrypted. Let me show you here. So what I just showed you is at rest encryption, but your data is actually encrypted in transit also. If you look at the endpoint URL, it's a HTTPS URL. So we encrypt it in transit and while it's sitting on our system while it's waiting to be processed. Yeah. The service principal, if your AI instance, so the question in chat is how is the service principal used? If your AI instance needs to talk to another AI service, then you can create essentially a managed identity, which is a service account. If your AI instance doesn't need to talk to some other Azure service internally, then you don't need to worry about this. To get a better understanding of managed identities, somebody mentioned earlier about registering apps with Entra. In order to get a better understanding of that, take the AZ204 class. That's our DevOps course. In that course, we walk you through all of that stuff. All right, everybody good so far? All right, great. All right, so I always like to do breaks. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick 10-minute break to give you guys a chance to stretch your legs, get something to drink, bio breaks. When we get back, we will continue on with our discussions here. I'll see you guys back here in 10 minutes. Minutes. All righty, everyone. So let's go ahead and continue on. Hopefully, you guys are enjoying the session here and kind of the demonstration and the whiteboarding kind of working hand in hand here. You guys have got some great questions. And again, we are recording the session, so you can always, once we get it posted this afternoon, or this evening, actually, you'll have the ability to play it as many times as you want there. All right, so now what we've done is we've got the instance created, and again, let me walk through a multi-service deployment just so you can see that it's really similar. So if you go in here, you select multi-service, we select create, and notice here the same options: pricing tier, the responsible AI notice information, the networking, the identity, the tags, review and create. So there's really no difference in that sense. And if we look at my multi-service one, which is my Bobby Face AI demo, same thing. I've got an endpoint, I've got a set of keys that I can use, but this allows me to use it for multiple services. Now, once you've got it created, so one thing I want to point out is that most of our AI services have their own dedicated AI portals. So this is kind of the back end portal that we use for provisioning it, but then let's call it a front end portal, if you will, that you use for testing out models and doing things of that nature. And those portals will vary depending on which service you're using. So let me give you an example here. So if I go to Vision, So notice here, portal.vision.cognitive.azure.com, and you don't have to remember it. The links are in the main portal here. But once I go in here, so this is the AI vision portal. So if I go in and I'm using the vision service, so whether in this case computer vision, I can actually go in here into the portal and I can do testing and so forth. So which I'll demonstrate for you. Later on this week, we're going to look at OpenAI. Same thing. If you go to oai.azure.com, this takes you to your OpenAI portal, your Azure AI Foundry portal, OpenAI Service portal, and we'll dive more into this one later on this week also. So a lot of them will have let's call it a front end portal, more user friendly portal that you can use. So for this one here, which for some reason my browser is kind of rendering it weird. So if I go in here, let me close out of this because it's looking funky here. Let's do this. I don't know why it's doing that, but okay. So in here you can see my environment. So this is your account information. There's a settings option over here where you can pull your resources. So now notice here, and this is going to be key. So let me bring up our other portal, our main portal for a second. Let's do a side by side. Let's do a side by side comparison. All right, so over here, now notice I'm in the vision portal, so I'm doing everything vision related. If you go in here, you'll notice for vision, there's my Bobby computer vision demo, which is my single instance, which is what you see here in the vision, which ties back to this one here. But if you notice, I've got another one here. That one, if I go down to my multi-service account, is that one. So when I created a multi-service account, I didn't say it was for vision or this or that. I just said create me a multi-service account, which can be used for a lot of my other AI services. I don't have to specify them. So if I go to some other ones, and let's see if Document Intelligence does it. I forgot the Document Intelligence URL now. There we go. There we go. documentintelligence.ai.azure.com. So now this is the Document Intelligence portal. So if I go over here, let's say in my Azure portal, and I create an instance of Document Intelligence, it will show up here. And I can authenticate, sign in with my lab environment. Here we go. So if I go to my settings here, I've got one, looks like this one is for something different. That's weird. I'll have to see what's going on there. I may be logged in with the wrong account here. But in my settings, it would show any of my Document Intelligence ones that I've created and so forth. This is for another lab environment, I think, that I have here. You can tell by the tenant here. So, but that is the Document Intelligence portal. So you have many different portals that you can use. So let's go back to our vision one here for a second. And you can pick which instance you want to use while you're doing your testing and so forth. So I can switch to my multi-service one. So I'm going to select that as my default resource. Now, anything that I do in this page, by default, will use this one here because this is the one I currently selected. I can always change it later. Why is that important? Because that's how billing is going to be done. Let's go back to our whiteboard for a second. If you have an environment where you have multiple subscriptions, like so, I can have this instance connect to this subscription. I can have a multi-service instance connecting to this one, and I can have another instance over here that connects to a totally different subscription. So I can break out billing for how this is done. So that's the nice thing about by doing this is like by selecting which one you want to use, you're basically changing the billing that you're using for it. All right. So the nice thing about the pages is they give you some samples of what you can do, some of the power. So for the vision one, just to give you an example here, and we're going to get into vision more as we in our next probably next, I think it's next week here. Let me double check here. When is vision? Is that next week? Actually, no, we're going to cover it this week. It's part of this week. So, so in here, you can do things like OCR, optical character recognition. You can do spatial analysis where it does like video analysis of your data. We can do face detection if we need to. We can analyze images. And here's the cool thing about this. So let's go with, we'll go with the featured ones, which is basically featured is kind of a sampling of all the other ones, the more popular ones. So let's try it out. So we're going to go in here. We can pick a video. So let's say this is the video that we're going to use. So with vision, using spatial analysis, it can analyze a video. So in this video, you've got some people, looks like they're shopping in a supermarket here, and so forth. So once so you could take your own videos, pass them using the endpoint and the key into the Azure AI service. It will then come back and take that video, and it can do things like create searching within it. So if I want to see where in the videos a woman falls, you do a search, and there it shows you exactly the timestamps on when that actually occurred. It sort of indexes your videos basically. Where images where there's milk on the floor, same thing, and so forth. So if you want to run through a summarization, there it is right there. It generates a summary of what occurred in that video. So this is an example of what you can do using the video component of vision for basically spatial analysis. Other things we can do, examples here, looking at products on shelves. So let me give you a perfect example of a use case for this. Excuse me. So here we go. So in here, we've got a bunch of different products. So this could be a video feed, it could be an image. Normally this would be a video feed, but it can keep track of products that are on the shelves. So let's say you're a retailer, like a supermarket or like a super Walmart. You can have cameras pointing at your shelves, and it can analyze when inventory is running low based on the images, and then you can have it automatically order things for you. So I mean, just an example of how you could use this. So that's your looking at products as far as this. You can also create your own models. So these are all pre-trained models that are designed to look for something specific. But you do have the ability with all of our Azure AI services, you can build your own training model, or you can train your own model to be more customized based on your business or what your requirements are. Other things that you can do with this, you can add captions. So in here, there's an option to add captions. And what this does is it allows me to go in and let's pick an image, and it will generate captions. So notice here, based on the image, it generated a caption of a man holding a surfboard on a rock. Or if I do this one here, a man jumping on a skateboard. So what's really happening here is the image is being sent. Let's go back to our whiteboard here. The app is sitting over here, and it's got the image of the skateboarder or the surfboard or whoever it was. It's sent to your instance. Your instance sends it here where it's processed, comes back, provides the response to you, and then the billing occurs to whatever subscription is tied to. So these are examples of what you can do with vision, and there's a lot of different things that you can do here. Now, one of the things, let's go in here and let me find it here. Oops, we're going to go over here. Let me, with all of my little icons disappearing right now, it's kind of hard for me to see what I'm looking for here. I have to log out and log back in. Well, anyway, I'll do some more demonstration. So here's an example of using the web portal to kind of get an idea of exactly what the technology can do. Now, let's take a look at this programmatically. Now, this is nice and all, but let's go back to, where is it? Right here, what I had earlier going on here. So in this example here, what I have is there's a little app, and you'll see this in your lab. There's a little app that runs, which basically goes in and it takes the images that you define that's in this images directory, and it generates captions on those images. That's essentially what what this application does. Now, in order to do this, let's go back to let's bring up our whiteboard here and do a side by side. So in order for this to work, what's gonna happen is I've got my web app here, which is essentially what you see right here. My web app needs to make an API call, make a request to my Azure AI instance, in this case, my Vision service. So the first thing I needed to do was to go into the Azure portal, go into Vision, and create an instance of the service. Once I created the instance of the service, it then generated, when I go into the instance, it generates a key in my endpoints. I will take those keys, that key and endpoint, and I'll put in my app settings.json, or if you're using Python, your .env file. By the way, in your labs, you get the option to use C# or Python. So if you're more comfortable with using Python, you can do the same thing in Python. It's up to you, whichever one you want to use. For those that are going to be taking this exam at some point, and you're wondering, well, do I need to know one versus the other? When you start your exam, it will ask you what language you're more comfortable with, Python or it's Python, C#, and I think REST is the other. I forgot what the other one is. I used C when I did mine, but you specify what it is that you want, and then all your questions will be based off of that language. Okay. If you're not a developer, that's fine. As long as if you can understand basic scripting, you should be fine. Here's the thing. On your exam, we're not going to make you write code. On your exam, we will give you a snippet of code. I'll give you an example. So we may give you, let's say, this right here. So in your exam, you may see a snippet of code like this, or like this. And what will happen is this piece will be blank, and there'll be a drop down, and you have to specify we give you all the options. You pick the option that's correct. So as long as you can do that, you should be fine with well, you're not going to get any right lines. You're gonna see that. So as long as you can do that, you should be fine for the exam. Again, practice, play around with the code, and you should be fine. All right, so now there we go. So I've got my app settings.json. I've put in my configuration information. So then what you'll do is you go down, you download your package, your AI Vision image analysis package. So there are various packages. So in this case, we're doing image analysis, but depending on what you're doing here, so spatial, face. In this case, we're using image analysis, but depending on whichever one you select, you'll download the package for that particular one, and you can do a quick internet search. And so whatever AI service you're using, whether it's Vision or whatever it may be, in here, there'll be examples. We always have them in here. Here we go, reference. So service side, here we go. So we always give you code examples of how to use it. So if you're using Python, here's your package installation. And then there we go here. And then you can follow along. For you test takers out there, I would highly recommend whether you use C#, Python, whatever you're going to use, go through the reference pages for each of these and get familiar with the basic syntax. So how do you get the endpoint? So understand this. This is what you'll see on your exam. You'll see something like this with maybe this piece missing or this piece missing. There'll be a drop-down box where you need to answer it. Or there may be a couple places where maybe this piece and this piece are missing, and you have to select in the drop-down box. So whatever language you're more comfortable with, go through the documentation, kind of get comfortable with it, play with it, and you should be good to go. All right, so now my web application has the endpoint and URL that it needs to make that call. So that's what we have here. Now, once you've got that done, and again, whether you use Python or whatever language, doesn't matter. Once you've got that done, then you're going to have to put in some code snippets. And for those that aren't familiar with coding, don't worry. In your lab, it'll actually literally just have you copy and paste. So it'll have you paste in different areas. Like like here, there'll be a section here where it'll say, okay, paste this snippet of code in here. So it'll tell you exactly what to paste and where to paste it. I will tell you this though, learn it. If you're going to be taking this certification exam, don't just paste it in there. Here's the cool thing, and I'm going to give you guys an example here. Let me find a piece here. Let's take this right here. So let's say hypothetically you have, actually that's an easy one. All of these are easy, but let's pick this one here. So let's say hypothetically you have no clue what this does. The link for the reference, hang on a second here. I'm going to put this link in here, and this is just a link to the main page, to the page, and you can go in there and you can, filter based on what you're looking for. But here's how you can study. When you're going through the code, if there's areas you don't understand what it's doing, which this one's pretty straightforward, but let's say hypothetically you don't know what it's doing. Here's what you want to do. Open up Copilot. Copilot is free, or you can use ChatGPT if you want to use ChatGPT if you're a ChatGPT person. And I'll just use my corporate one. Doesn't you can use the publicly available one. You don't have to use your company one if you don't have one. And all you need to do is say, explain this code, or in natural language. You can say, what does this code do, whatever it may be. So explain this code and run it, and it'll tell you line by line exactly what that code does. So in here, image analysis results. So right here. So this is a variable that will store the results of your image analysis. In here, it's going to convert the image into a stream format. And then these are the various options that we have, visual options. So basically what we're doing here is we're telling the web app, submit the request to the AI service. And when you submit the request, this is what we want back. This is what we want the AI model to give us back. We want to know a caption, generated caption about that image, which, by the way, a caption is one line. It's a one-liner. I also wanted to generate dense captions. Dense captions is up to 10 lines. And it's just a description of the image. Identify any objects, generate tags, and identify any people. So you can pick and choose which ones you want. And if you don't know what features you want, again, and by the way, this is how I learn. If there's things that I work for Microsoft, and there's plenty I don't understand. So whenever I don't understand something, this is what I do. I literally will do this. So for this one here, okay, these are the captions, the options that we have in our code currently, but are there any other options available? So I asked it and it said, yes. So here you go. We can do smart crops, which basically creates a thumbnail image, keeping a certain aspect ratio of your image. This is useful for, let's say, I'll give you a perfect example. In Teams, all these little icons that you have of your image of yourself, like right here and like here and here, that's an example of smart cropping, where we're taking an image and a picture and shrinking it down to a certain aspect ratio, so that way it can be used by something. LinkedIn uses this. Amazon, all these companies use this. They may not use Microsoft, but they use some equivalent technology to do that. There's another one, which is read. So I can do a visual feature and then type in, select read as my option as one, and you can have them all in there if you want to. What this does is this uses OCR technology, optical character recognition. So what it does is it can literally take an image. So let's say there's a picture of me holding up my government ID card. And the image is good enough to where you can actually make out my government ID information, my name, my address, and so forth. I can feed that image into the vision service. And if I select my visual feature of read, so I would go in here and specify visual features.read, then what it will do is it'll actually use OCR and read the text off of my driver's license and tell me what that is. It can read handwriting. So it can actually look at handwriting assuming your hand, it can't read mine. My handwriting's terrible, but general handwriting, it can read it and convert it into text and tell you what it is. So there's all kinds of neat little things that you can do. So, tags, read, smart copy. So these are the 7 different things that are available as far as visual features. So when you're practicing and when you're studying for your exam, or for in the real world, use Copilot to help you generate that. So any questions on that? Does that make sense to everyone? So what we're doing here is we've got a little app that's going to pull my endpoint URL and my API key. It's going to take this and submit this along with the request. And it's going to pull that from here. Now, let's continue on here. So we're going to do an image analysis. And what are we going to do in here? And we're going to analyze an image. So we're going to analyze the image. We're going to get this information here. This is what we want from that image. Now, in here, the output, I want it to show me the captions. I want it to show me dense captions, which is what I have here, captions and dense captions. I didn't have it. It's not going to pull up my tags, objects, or people yet because I haven't had that snippet of code in here. But it's going to pull my captions and my dim captions. I can also remove the background for whatever image. So I've got a bunch of images sitting in here. Let's say my building one or my street one. It'll take this image and it'll generate a one-liner caption, and it'll generate dense captions, which is up to 10 lines describing this image. A yellow car, a dog, a man, a street, a building, and so forth. So it'll generate tags and captions based off of that as part of my process here. And that is what we have now. For those that are not familiar with coding, be careful when you're. Matter of fact, what is this right here? What just happened here? Some curly braces here. But so what I would recommend that you do is when you're going through this, take your time, don't rush, and it'll tell you exactly what to paste and where to paste it. Okay. So just be careful when you're doing it. It does. If you don't, you'll have some issues. And that's what we're going to be here. And you're going to do labs tomorrow, so don't worry. But once you've done this, what will happen is, by the way, my machine is running an older version, so that's why I'm getting these errors. So I'm getting some issues here. Cannot be a null URL string. So I've got something screwed up here. I'll have to play around with to see exactly what's going on. But once you run this, and you'll do it in your lab, what'll happen is it'll go through and it'll actually generate your take an image, whichever image you want, generate a dense caption for it, and it will go in there and let's see here. Some Docker stuff earlier. It's going to have you install the package, so you're going to add the package as part of that process. And then you're going to run. I've got to fix my URL string. I'm getting a URL string error here.
I think Bobby, your app settings has a typo. There you
Where-
go on line number 2. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. See, this is why I hate this stuff. There we go. So you're like eagle eyes. You saw that just by quickly seeing that there. Let's see here. There we go. So now if you notice here, it analyzed my image here. And because I told it to generate, in this case, the output to give me captions and dense captions, which is what we have here, it showed it. So the image is of building.jpg. So if I go to my building, there it is. So it's a large white building with a dome and a large lawn with the United States Capitol in the background. So this one's kind of boring here. So if I did a different one here, so now we're looking at my street.jpg, same thing. So here's my caption. Remember, a caption is a one-liner, and then my dense caption can be up to 10 entries, 10 lines. Doesn't always mean it's going to have 10, but it can have up to 10 describing the image. So now if you notice here, this right here, this is what's called a confidence rating or confidence score, to be more technical. This is a percentage. This is going to be from 0 to 100%. This is going to be very important. Here's why. Again, if you go back to the SDKs and look at code examples, what this is doing is the AI model is coming back and giving you a response, but it's also telling you the level of confidence or the probability on which it thinks it's right. So in this case, it's 82% certain that the image shows a man walking a dog on a leash on a street. So it's 80%, 82% confident that it analyzed the picture accurately. So let's say you're writing an application. So for whatever you use this for in your organization, let's say you use it, you may say, you know what? If the response, the confidence score is below a certain threshold. So let's say if it's below 70% confident, I don't want to process it. I don't want to continue to process it. Maybe I want to kick it off to another process to do something with it because it's not accurate enough for our threshold. So you can use that confidence rating to help you with determining, do we accept the response or do we not accept the response? So that is an example of how you would use that. But the key here is why do we create that endpoint or that service? Is so we can get, or the instance is so we can get the endpoint and we can generate a key. What happened is my request for one of my images, whichever one I selected, whether it's street or building, was sent to the AI service, my AI service, along with requirements. So in this case here, this is what I want for there, and specifically, because we have a right line here, so show me only the caption and the dense caption. So only show me those two things, even though I'm asking for all the other things, object, people, and tabs. I don't have, which in your lab you'll get a chance. You'll just do a console right line and add those in there. But you'll see those also. So you'll slowly build upon that, and you'll do these labs tomorrow with JF. But you'll see exactly how this works. So you can use the vision. I like to call it the playground, the vision portal, to test out things, the functionality, features, and then you can generate code. And by the way, down here at the bottom of each page, we always include links that you can use for as developers if you need to do research and so forth. This will take you to the vision main documentation page. And then from here, I always just skip all of this and go straight into here, and I'll go down to my, where is it at? How-to guides, somewhere in here. It's under here, and then go to my references. And whether it's client or server side. Now, by the way, I can answer Python, C#, .NET type stuff. I am not a Java guy, so if you ask me some Java stuff, I'm going to give it to JF. If he's a Java guy, all I can do is lie to you, or I could use Copilot. Those are your only two options if you ask me Java questions. Or Node, same thing. I'm going to give you the same answer. If I give you an answer for any of those two, it could be for the opposite thing. I don't deal with those. But for each of our services, there are reference guides and SDKs that we have for using it. All right. Any questions on any of that? So what do you guys think? Do you enjoy this format? This is how our Chalk Talks will go. Do you guys enjoy that? It beats death by PowerPoint, don't you think? Because you get to kind of see it in action. You get to look at some code. You get to see the portal. And I like to do whiteboarding to kind of help you visually connect the dots on exactly what's happening here with this. So as I mentioned before, the Chalk Talks are the only thing going forward that are recorded. So once we're done here, I'll give me a half an hour or so to get it posted. I'll post it. By the way, since we're done with the intros from this morning, the orientation, all communication, unless it has to do with general stuff, I'm going to post here. So when I upload the Chalk Talk for this session, I'm going to post it in here. I'm going to post in this channel the video is uploaded, just so you know, okay? All right, guys, so with that, hopefully you enjoyed the session. Tomorrow, just to give you an idea, tomorrow we've got a couple things going on here. Let me bring it up. Our schedule. So
Hey,
tomorrow
Bobby,
morning.
just a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
Just a quick question. So, in the walkthrough that you demonstrated, right? One is the back end, one is the vision, which is kind of a front end, and the application code, right? Now, the
Right.
application code is that going to be uploaded to the vision, or is it going to be directly talking to the back end?
It talks. So let's go back to our picture here. It's a great question. So in my example that I gave you guys, my application code was sitting out here. It was sitting outside of the AI altogether. So in this case, my application code is running in Visual Studio. In the real world, your application, oops, that's not what I want. In the real world, your application code would probably sit in, let's say, an Azure web app under App Services. Let's say you create a web app, your code would sit in there. It doesn't matter where your code sits. Your code could sit in AWS, could sit in Google, it could sit on the moon. As long as the moon has internet connectivity back to Azure, then you're good to go.
So in parallel, where does the vision code lives?
Repeat that one more time, sorry.
The vision code, right? The vision is also going to be talking to the back end.
Right.
The vision that you, so is that another, if I want to have, extension of one of the vision code, how do I do it?
So on your web app, you're going to programmatically, so it depends on what your application is trying to do, okay? So let me give you an example. Let's say you're the state of New York and you have tolls. And what you want is you want to be able to, when somebody goes to a toll booth, instead of stopping to pay a toll, you want a camera to capture their license plate and then take that license plate image, convert it into text, so that way we can then, it can look it up in a database and then bill them for that toll charge. Okay. All of that code to make that work would happen here.
Okay.
Once the image, the picture is taken. So I'm going to have some camera system, sitting over here. By the way, this is supposed to be a camera, by the way. So I've got a camera system sitting over here that's going to take a picture of this car, the license plate. So it's going to snap that license plate. So I can have a web app that we'll call this the camera web app. So I got a camera web app that takes the picture. Once that camera takes the picture, I can have another app where the camera sends that image to this image app. This image app will then send the request, the picture, and so the web app would then send the picture. It would send the image, which is somewhere in here. My image file, it's referenced in here, along with what we want to pull from it. So in this case, I would probably do this. I would probably do visual feature, excuse my typing here, dot read. I would do a read option. And I spelled this wrong, but anyway, I would do a visual feature read and get rid of all of it, get rid of the rest of them, because I wanted to just take and extract the digits, the numbers and letters from the image. So my application would send the image, the picture, and the code on what it wants. So in this case, I want you to read the image. You send it to your AI instance. Your AI instance then sends it internal to Microsoft. Microsoft reads the image, converts it into text, sends that JSON response back to your application saying, okay, here's what you wanted. Letters A, B, C, D, E, F is on the license plate. Your application would then take that JSON response and say, okay, now that I've got the license plate information in text form, maybe I now kick it off to another application to bill it or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So the only thing the AI service does is receives your request and generates a response. It holds none of your code. That is done through your applications.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Anyone? Thank you, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this.
One last question.
Sure, go ahead. What's up?
Yeah,
I have
so
a question.
so what happens to the data that goes into the infrastructure? Is it going to be stored? Like, what are the governance on that?
So it's stored temporarily only to service your request. Now, it depends on which you're using. So if you're using face technologies, it stores, I think, and JF, if you know off the top of your head, I think it'll store it up to 24 hours, but then it purges it. We do not store anything at all long term. When it comes to OpenAI, so when you're using generative AI, we don't store it at all. You know, but we have to store it temporarily while we're waiting for the response to come back. So as long as it takes for that response to come back.
Okay.
Now, that brings up I'm sorry, go ahead. Another question?
Yeah, just for the lab tomorrow, you're gonna have a separate student or kind of camp environment, or you're gonna
Yep.
play all this? Okay.
You have your own environment. Everybody's going to get to go out there and break some things.
All right.
By the way, here and who I think John, you just asked that previous question. Here's another cool thing. So let's say you are concerned about, you don't want any data to being sent, because in my example, in my demo, you're actually sending the image. You're sending the image to Microsoft so we can process it. So let's say the image is about aliens, okay? And you don't want anybody on the planet knowing that you know about aliens, you know? Maybe they're alien autopsy pictures, okay? So you want to be able to analyze the image, but you don't want Microsoft to know that it's images about aliens. So here's what you can do. You can deploy a container, whether it's Kubernetes, Azure Container Apps, and you can containerize the AI service. Now, to do that, here's what you would do. If you go to mcr.microsoft.com, this is our public container registry. This is where we store all of our public containers. If you go up here and do a search for vision, and by the way, not every container, I think generative AI doesn't have, you can't do a generative AI one, OpenAI, but for vision. So here you go. So if you want to analyze video, or if you want to do OCR, or some of these other technologies that we have, or you want to build your own custom model, so you can download the container. And what that does is now, so let's say this is your company. Your company is sitting right here. You would install a container here, and it'll be a vision container. And what would happen is your container will have an endpoint and a key, just like it normally does. But your app would point to your local container. Your container would analyze the image and then generate a response. And the only thing your container does back here, is it sends back to your instance billing information, utilization information, so we can charge you. But in that scenario, we never actually see we don't ever get any data. Does that make sense? So if there are instances where you don't want the data going to Microsoft, deploy a containerized version, and then now we just get the billing stuff.
Yeah, we did something like this with the business intelligence, with like because I work for Manulife, the John Hancock. So we did where we passed like information, like financial information, PDFs through business intelligence. But what we did, we used Kubernetes to that. So I was curious, why? Okay, yeah. No,
Yeah, you can use Kubernetes. Obviously, you can use Kubernetes on-prem if you have it. You can use Kubernetes in Azure. You can use Azure Container Apps. I wouldn't use Azure Container Instances for it, but Azure Container Apps, Kubernetes, or on-prem, you can definitely do it. Now, there's always a gotcha to everything in life, right? I always say you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So here's the thing with the containers. If you use a container technology, the container must have connectivity back to Azure. It's got to have an internet connection or an Azure connection. If your container does not have an Azure connection, then it won't work. You got to have an Azure connection. Now, you can deploy a container without an internet connection. Let me repeat that. There's a third option. You can deploy a container without connecting it to the internet. Now, in order to do that, you've got to get Microsoft approval. So you can't just go out to the internet and deploy it. You've got to get approval from Microsoft to do that. And the way it works in that scenario is Microsoft will come in and ask, well, what are you going to use it for? what do you expect your monthly utilization is going to be for it? And then based on what you predict you're going to use, we're just going to bill you monthly for that utilization. So if you go below it, you're still going to get billed for it. If you go above it, then we're still going to bill you for what you told us. But it's your job to tell us more. It's your job to pay us more money if you're using it more. So you can either use the deployment where everything is sent here. You can use a deployment where it's sent to your own container, but the container is connected to the internet and only billing information is sent. Or you can use it where you're only using a container internal with no internet connectivity. But for that, you got to get Microsoft approval. There's some things you got to do.
Got it.
Make sense? Everybody good on that? By the way, and again, containers don't work for all Azure AI technologies, only for some of them. Vision is one. I think document intelligence. I think document intelligence is another one. Like OpenAI, you can't use it for it because OpenAI is internet based. So there are certain ones. I don't think OpenAI. I don't want to lie into because things change around here all the time. Yeah, okay, yeah, no OpenAI. But there are certain ones like OpenAI where oh no, it's not. Okay, this is just AI. Where you can't use a container-based technology. You got to use the Microsoft service because that's just too big on the back end to put into a container for you to use. Most of these search, computer vision, face, speech, a lot of these these you can containerize, but this one is difficult. Custom vision, you can containerize that one also. I don't know about I'm sure anomaly detector you can, but you can look at the container registry and get that. Any questions on that? Any questions? Let's see, Roger, you say, but Bobby just mentioned that if we don't want to send to Microsoft, we can. Well, there's a special type of configuration. You can't just deploy it, Raju. You've got to get approval from Microsoft. You can deploy a regular container from here and use it as long as that container has connectivity to the internet. And there is a grace period. So if your container goes down, like the internet goes down for a day, there's a grace period. We don't shut you off, but I forgot how long. It's 2 or 3 days or something like that. But if you want to go with a container without any internet ever on that container, you've got to get special Microsoft approval. You can't just deploy that.
One question, follow up on that. So let's say we do have internet connection and we will obviously send billing information to MS. So the advantage of using that container approach is just like your data will not go into MS directly, only within the container itself, the processing will happen.
Exactly, which you control the container in-house. So yes, correct.
Okay, so that's the primary and the only advantage, or is there something else that we can think of?
Honestly, it's more complicated to set up because now you have to have a container infrastructure like Kubernetes. But
right.
The only reason and I hate to use absolutes, the only reason I can think of why you would use a container is because you have data that you do not want sent to Microsoft, but you still want to use AI technologies, or your internet connection just sucks.
Okay.
Your bandwidth in your company is so terrible that you don't want to send all that stuff out.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? I'm sure there's other reasons why, but those are the only two I can think of off the top of my head here. Cool, guys. Well, yeah, by the way, I'm going to stop the recording. This is how we like